and female in his own image.
Kinsey has legitimized the free sex revolution, and he did it through academia. But what's interesting, according to research that's been done on this gentleman, this guy was a pervert himself.
Kinsey's critics claim that his real motive was not science, but a social agenda to change the morality of America, something admitted by Kinsey biographer Jonathan Gathorne Hardy.
It's abundantly clear as you go into it that there was a very large social agenda. He didn't just want a greater tolerance and sanity from understanding the facts of sex. He thought it was quite monstrous the way homosexuals were regarded. In general, there was a very powerful social agenda, which is perfectly plain when you read the book, from the polemic right the way through it, and was perfectly plain at the time to the people who worked with him.
When the Kinsey reports were published, they shocked the country, because the behavior that Kinsey described did not at all represent what most Americans believed about their own sexuality. Consider that Kinsey was documenting the behavior of the World War II era, those that Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. Among Kinsey's more controversial claims is the idea that 10% of American men were fully homosexual for at least 3 years of their life, while 37% of American men had engaged in homosexual contact to the point of orgasm at least once in their lives. Later studies would place those numbers much lower, with only 1% of men in the U.S. claiming to be homosexual, while only 2 to 3% admitted to some kind of homosexual activity in their lifetime. Nevertheless, Kinsey's data was seized upon by men like Harry Hay, who read the Kinsey reports, left his wife and children, and went on to found the gay rights revolution that began in the 1960s. To this day, the gay rights movement is largely based on Kinsey's data. Kinsey also reported high levels of premarital sex, claiming that 69% of American men had visited prostitutes and that 50% of married men were guilty of adultery. Again, a later study done as early as 1960 by Phyllis and Eberhard Kronhausen would find that the levels of sexual promiscuity among males were much lower than Kinsey had reported. According to his fellow researchers, the reason for this dramatic difference is because Kinsey manipulated the data, including men from America's prisons, as part of the regular male population.
He wrote that he found 1,300 to 1,400 sex offenders that he used as his normal male population. What?
In addition to the convicted sex offenders, Kinsey included regular prisoners who were serving time for other offenses, along with 199 sexual psychopaths, all mixed together as part of the regular male population and presented to the American people as the average American male. In this interview for the documentary titled 1 in 10, listen as Paul Gephardt, who was one of Kinsey's co-authors and a member of his original team, admits to the high percentage of prisoners and their impact on Kinsey's data.
With these poorer, lower educational level samples. And when I say poorer, they had, for example, 55% were prison. 55% were prison. And I think that has a definite effect. We know we didn't have enough non-prison people to do much of a comparison, but he didn't do a comparison. He simply took the prison people he got and used them with that less than college educated sample. But the trouble was, by, you might say, emphasizing the less than college educated sample, he introduced a lot of errors into the data.
With America's prison population presented as the average male, is it any wonder that laws would be changed to accommodate sexual predators while failing to protect women and children? To create high levels of homosexual activity, Kinsey also went into Chicago's underground, into gay bars and homosexual bathhouses, and incorporated the radically gay population into his regular male data, along with bootleggers, gamblers, male prostitutes, ne'er-do-wells, pimps, thieves, and hold-up men. All this according to his own report. Kinsey used similar tactics to redefine the average American female.
They use this picture all the time to try and show the American public that they were interviewing average American women, all right? Except that this was their secretary, okay? This is a secretary at the Kinsey Institute, and they would always label her as though she was just some average American woman. Sometimes they put Kinsey in the picture interviewing her, and sometimes they put him. And now, after I exposed that in one of my books, the Kinsey Institute has now admitted on its website, you know, they give the name of her so it doesn't look as though they're trying to phony the thing.
To create high levels of female promiscuity among American wives, Kinsey redefined married women to include any woman that had lived with a man for at least a year, a broad description that could include prostitutes who had lived with their pimps. In fact, prostitutes were a subculture that Kinsey specifically sought out, mixing them in with the regular female population. As a result, Kinsey's report stated that some 50% of American women engaged in premarital sex, while 26% of married women were supposedly involved in adultery. Kinsey went on to report that an incredible 87% of unmarried women were having abortions, while 25% of married wives were also aborting. It was these high percentages, shocking even by today's standards, that would help to legalize abortion in the years that would follow. For decades, Dr. Judith Reisman has argued against what is often referred to as Kinsey's junk science because of its dramatic and devastating impact on American law and society.
Corrections starts to enact all of this into corrections decisions. In the legal profession and law schools, now Kinsey would be taught as part of the legal structure via the American Law Institute Model Penal Code. That ferrets out into the private and public education, becomes our sex education, is in our American Law Review journals. It's found in parole through corrections, state and local, and criminal, civil, family, and juvenile justice. And expert witnesses then from the sex world begin to inform this whole structure. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had a real dirty deal. We have, as that FBI agent said to me, the head of the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, after he saw my work on Kinsey and on Playboy, he said to his sons, "Guys, we have been conned."
Dr. Reisman is not alone in her conclusions, nor was she the first to discover these things. As Reese Committee lawyer Renee Wormser states in his book, the much-publicized Kinsey studies base an advocacy of criminal and social reform on the very unscientific material which Dr. Kinsey had collected. Wormser went on to cite psychiatric historian Albert Deutsch, who said of the Kinsey reports that so startling are its revelations, so contrary to what civilized man has been taught, that they would be unbelievable but for the impressive weight of the scientific agencies backing the survey. Wormser comments saying, "Note how impressive is the word scientific and how false." But he goes on to suggest even more, revealing that, according to the Reese Committee, the postmodern thinking in America today is no mere accident, but has been intentionally created by the elite foundations as part of a greater agenda, one in which the work of Kinsey plays no small part.